Ladies and gentlemen, KageKaze here, bringing you an update on Diablo 3 with the 2.0.4 patch. There's a lot to go over, both documented and undocumented changes, and unfortunately, I'm a little behind in presenting this news, so I want to kind of get right into it. We're going to start with the documented changes that come right from Blizzard. So right out of the patch notes. General changes. They've greatly increased the survivability of pets that are summoned by several items and skills. This includes pets that are summoned from Skycutter, Maximus, the Gidbin, Ginzaniku, the Litany of the Undaunted, Call of the Ancients, and Falling Sword Rise Brothers. So some survivability increases across the board there. Very nice to see because it always sucks to get a weapon or skill that just doesn't survive like you want it to. All town hubs have had the placement of the Nephilim Rift Obelisk, Orak, and Kadala adjusted to help reduce the chance of accidental clicking. A very welcome change, I might add, considering that it was very easy to accidentally click on a rift or something else when you were trying to use one of the crafters in certain acts. The blacksmith's belongings have also been changed to no longer have collision, so you won't get stuck on that tiny box. Alright, from there they're going right into changes with the classes. Now we're seeing a lot of buffs here across the board, typically in the areas that the classes need it. So looking at Barbarian, their philosophy here was that skills that spin Fury feel good, but they feel that the Fury generators, especially the single target options, just didn't quite feel meaty compared to the ones that hit more than one target. I can attest to this, a lot of the options there for Barbarian just usually feel better when you can hit multiple targets at one time. So we're looking at a pretty significant upgrade to damage for Bash. Frenzy getting a pretty huge buff. That one's going from 120 to 155, which at maximum stacks is about 775% weapon damage. The single target options for weapon throw are also getting a buff, but not the multi-target ones. So they are sticking to that philosophy. Moving from the Barbarian, we're going to the Crusader. Now, many of the Crusader's Wrathspenders are below what they would like. Heaven's Fury Fires of Heaven was considered to be overperforming, so it is getting a nerf. Very specifically, it will be going from 950 to 735% weapon damage. That's pretty significant. However, they are making this up with several buffs to several skills, getting the weapon damage up and basically evening out the damage rather than it all lying on the one skill. Much like Barbarians, the single target Wrath generators for Crusaders, specifically Punish and Justice, didn't feel quite meaty enough compared to the multi-target ability, so they are also getting a buff much like the Barbarian. They're also making adjustments to the skill Steed Charge in all of its runes. The cooldown and the duration of the skill have both been reduced. The skill is going from a 2-second to a 1.5 second duration. This also means that the rune that increased the duration to 3 seconds is getting reduced to 2 seconds, so you're only getting about a half-second increase in duration on that, but considering the speed on Steed Charge, this can still be fairly significant. The idea is that while it may not last as long, you'll be able to use the skill more often. They are removing the ability for Steed Charge to break stuns. However, it can still be used as a mobility skill that allows you to get out of root effects such as Jailer. They're also increasing the damage on all of the damage-focused Steed Charge abilities. And another significant change here for Crusaders is the addition of damage reduction. If you didn't know, Crusaders did not get the 30% damage reduction buff that other melee classes get, because the Crusader is a mid-range character. He was considered a ranged character in that regard. He was not given any kind of reduction. But since he is a hybrid character, they've gone the hybrid route, and instead of getting a 30% like the Monk and Barbarian, he's getting a 15% damage reduction. Demon Hunters also seeing the philosophy that the single target generators don't feel as meaty. I'm seeing a theme here. So they are increasing the damage of a couple of the single target generating abilities for the Demon Hunter. Witch Doctors also getting the single target treatment as far as signature spells are considered, since they don't have generators, but they are increasing the damage of a lot of the single target abilities for those moments when you have low mana. They specifically say that Witch Doctors were lacking good options when low on mana, and it was because of a lack of attractive signature spells that resulted in builds that were focused pretty much on sustaining mana, so they wanted to give you options to be able to build around that as you would like. All right, the most interesting change for Witch Doctors, though, is the change to Haunt. Haunt has had its mana cost reduced drastically, from 200 to 50, allowing you to cast it multiple times in succession. Along with the reduction in mana cost, the base skill damage has been increased. We're going from a 1,465% over 6 to a 4,000 over 12. With this change, you'll see about a 90% weapon damage increase over the way it was before, and since it's lasting longer, you won't have to cast it nearly as often. So you're getting the mana reduction and you're getting the longer duration, making Haunt a much more viable skill for different builds. Wizards this time didn't get any real philosophy changes. What happened here though is that they are getting nerfs to 2 skills through the form of bug fixing. So they didn't specifically try to nerf them, but they got nerfed because they were overperforming because of bugs. We're talking specifically about Arcane Orb, Frozen Orb, and Electrocute. These skills will now be brought down to the levels that they are expected to be. There's no specific numbers listed here because the basic fixes were that Frozen Orb was chilling for longer than intended and was also causing a bonus damage radius in an area that was larger than intended as well. Electrocute had a proc scaler that was 0.25, meaning that out of 1 every 4 casts, it would proc whatever your on-hit effect is. That's been brought down to 0.166, so that's been pretty significantly reduced. Now, on the upside, Teleport has received some quality of life improvements. The range on Teleport has been increased. Due to this change, the rune Wormhole has been reduced from 4 casts to 3, but the overall range you can cover with Teleport with Wormhole is technically greater by 10 yards. And as for the monks, well, as of this time, there were no monks changes to announce, so there's nothing there. Sorry, monks. Alright, now on to changes to adventure mode. Very minor here. The Nephilim obelisks have a short cast time before they activate, and the Nephilim rifts have been adjusted for potential layout increases for the sewer and aqueduct style of dungeons, which is always nice. More randomization is always good. Alright, crafting is getting some significant changes here. Level 70 crafted sets no longer require the Flawless Royal Gems. They instead now require Marquee Gems. An interesting change, and quite honestly, I would have been happy if they would have just said Imperial Gems here, I think, since Imperial Gems can drop on Master and higher. The idea here seems to be that the sets, in order to make those, you first, of course, have to find the set. Beyond that, then you have to make sure you make the highest quality gem. And you also have to farm legendary crafting materials. There's a lot you have to do for crafting a lot of these in-game level 70 sets. So taking out the need for the Flawless Royal Gem is a big change. I especially think this is a reason behind this is the fact that those gems are usually very potent and usually highly desired. I mean, they're a significant upgrade from the Imperial gems that we are getting. And it's always a difficult choice to want to make one of those gems and then end up turning it into a crafting material, especially when if you look at the video I produced on the jeweler going into levels 11 and 12, you'll see that it would cost you 4.4 million gold just going from Imperial, and Imperials aren't the most common of gem drops, so it's usually going to be more gold than that. So I think what they're trying to do is just bring that back, rein it in a little bit. Now, the drop rate of unique legendary crafting materials has been significantly increased. It's going to match the drop rate of Death's Breath. Now, if you haven't seen it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a chart that comes from Reddit here that I found by way of Diablo fans. This shows you the drop rate for Death's Breath, as it was prior to the patch. 15% on normal, 77% on tier 6, and you can see a nice range in between. Tier 1, which is a good starting place, is at 31%, 37% tier 2 on Torment 2, 44% Torment 3. Now compare that with the legendary crafting mats, which you'll see exactly underneath them. Normal has a 5% chance of getting a legendary crafting mat. Then look up at tier 6, 25% chance to get a legendary crafting mat. That means if you're sitting around Torment 1 or 2, you're only getting a 10 to 12% chance of finding a legendary crafting material. What this means is that it's very difficult to get certain sets because there are some sets that require you to find a very specific spawn and maybe a small zone. Specifically, I know of a set where you have to farm from Whimsyshire. It's not a very big level, and only certain monsters will drop the legendary crafting material, which means you're going to be running a lot if you want to craft any of it. This really wasn't a very good drop rate, and I'm glad to see they're bringing it up. So everything under the legendary crafting mats area there, you can look at Death's Breath, and that's the new number. So I'm very glad to see that change. And speaking of Death's Breath, you're going to enjoy the drop rates for Death's Breath because now you don't need them anymore for 61 to 70 rare crafting recipes. Now, that is to say that they are still required for legendary and set pieces and can still require quite a bit of those. So you're still going to need that Death's Breath, but it's not going to be as limiting of a factor in leveling up at least anymore. Lastly, Crusaders and shield users in general should be happy to hear that legendary crafted shields will now provide the correct amount of block value for their level. Next up is items. Something that was promised to us a little while back is that the treasure from resplendent chests has been improved to feel more resplendent. So yes, treasure will drop a bit more often from treasure chests, but don't get all excited just yet, because one of the changes that has happened just recently is a reduced amount of treasure chests. We'll be going over that, as that was a more recent update. So let's continue on with these notes for now. Bug fix to legendary follower relics will no longer roll incorrect primary stats, so you shouldn't see intelligence on a Templar relic anymore. And Malthael is now much more afraid, will consistently drop his Reaper's Fear legendary crafting materials, so those Reaper rafts you may have been wanting should be a lot easier to get, especially since they took away the farming method to get him, since you have to wait for his death animation in order to get loot from him anymore. And unfortunately, for those of you who have your Gloves of Worship who are enjoying your 1 hour buffs on the Empowered and Fleeting Shrines, that has also been fixed. Going into the monsters section of the patch notes, we can see that damage from ghosts with the Soul Siphon ability has been reduced. I kind of noticed that with certain monsters with that ability. I didn't know what that ability was. I didn't know what it was called. I just know that there were certain ghosts that were hitting pretty hard, and it looks like this was one thing that they agreed on, so they've reduced that ability. I'm actually happy to see that. Poison Enchanted is also seeing a bit of a nerf too. Duration of each Poison Enchanted globule is reduced from 8 to 6 seconds. The number of enchanted globules has been reduced from 4 to 3 per cast, and it will be now triggered with more variation in timing from champion packs, so it should be a bit more sporadic rather than consistent. An interesting nerf to be sure, although when it came to Poison Enchanted, it was pretty difficult to deal with certain packs, and it could definitely cover the area very quickly, so they probably saw that as being maybe just a bit too much, especially when combined with other things on top of it. By itself, not necessarily too bad, but I have seen some pretty terrible packs with that constantly requiring you to move out of the way. I don't think it was anything too much, but they decided they wanted to reduce it, so we have that. And of course, the Kill Malthael quest required to be completed, as I mentioned just a moment ago. And speaking of farming Malthael for his items, it looks like in the quest section, we can see that the campaign mode, Manglemaw, now only drops loot and gives XP before the player progresses to the Chancellor's Tomb quest. So he can't be farmed anymore like he was by using the waypoint or checkpoint system there. On the upside, though, the Jar of Souls, one of my favorite events, and the Matriarch Bones, the alternative event that could spawn, both have additional monsters and spawns in Torment 1 and higher, making them a bit more difficult. And for those interested, the Crazy Climber event now requires players to kill monsters spawned during the event to complete. Alright, so that is the documented changes. And this patch hasn't been without its challenges, because shortly after this patch was released, they found more bugs that immediately needed to be resolved. So some hot fixes that happened. Well, for one, Blessed Shield Shattering Throw was doing damage to the Crusaders that was casting it, and possibly allies. That shouldn't happen anymore. Shouldn't happen at all. Alright, and beyond that, Iron Maiden was a skill that was erroneously providing more thorns at higher levels and difficulties. It was scaling with monster difficulty and providing more thorns damage than they intended. Unfortunately, the tooltip will still be bad on this until they produce another patch. That being a display bug, it has to be fixed on the client, but the actual damage itself has been adjusted. Now, before I move on to the undocumented fixes, let's go ahead and talk about the latest hotfixes that went live, since these are, again, documented and we can actually quantify them a bit. So what we've learned is that Blizzard wants Rifts to really be that place that's really going to give you the most items. And when you're not finding items in Rifts, they want Kadala to be a way of very specifically replacing a certain type of gear. Say you want a shiny new pair of boots. You go to Kadala, you go and you gamble for those boots. So with that in mind, what they've done is they have reduced the items that unique monsters drop. And when I say unique monsters, I mean those are the ones that are not really the elites. They've got specific names, but they're not usually as powerful as elites. They basically didn't provide the challenge, but they were providing the same loot. So those have been nerfed down a bit. Now, I mentioned too that resplendent chests are dropping more loot. Well, chest spawns have been thinned out across the game. They ideally want it to be that when you find the chest, you get some nice items, but they just don't want that to be the big thing, because they were finding that people were, instead of going out and fighting monsters, they would go out and they would do a run that just had chests in it. So without fighting monsters, you might go in Torment 6 and just open a bunch of chests and get a lot of loot. They want to kind of go back to the risk reward, where fighting the monsters and putting your life at risk is really where you're going to get the most reward. So while those are the downsides, that we have less chests and the unique monsters are dropping less, the good news is that the bonus to legendary drop rates in Rifts has been increased. If you were not aware, the drop rate for legendaries in Rifts was fairly recently increased by 25%. Well, that's been increased yet again. So with the latest hotfixes, the drop rate in Rifts has been doubled. It's now 100% higher than what it was. So you should see more legendaries coming out of Rifts now. Now this includes, while you're in the Rift, the chance to find legendaries from monsters, from chests, elites, everything that's inside a Rift is pretty much double. But they were quick to say that this doesn't mean bounty bags. Those are decided when you get them, so don't go out and just try and open all your bounty bags in the Rifts. Kadala's legendary drop rate has also been increased, but it's been quote-unquote significantly increased. No specific number has been given. Alright, so now that we're done with everything that's documented, we'll go ahead and go through the undocumented changes now. So one of the things that some people noticed is that there were new paragon portraits added. These are for the higher tiers of paragon, and as such, since it is an undocumented change, I don't have the exact numbers of when they occur. It is speculated to be every 100 paragon points beyond 200, I believe. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and throw out the picture that was linked off of Diablo fans. Beyond that, we've also heard that the Archon beams for wizards have been changed. So depending upon the rune you have, the beam has a new special effect. So I'll get a little bit of footage for that put together and kind of show it off here. There's also a video, again, by Diablo fans that you can check out. Other minor changes, well, we've got new gambling icons from Kadala. A very nice quality of life change is that the numbers for health in players and monsters now have commas, so you can actually tell what type of number increment you're dealing with, rather than having to count the zeros. Quests that you haven't completed. Now this is important because of the reset quest button, because Malthael can drop a unique item every time you kill him in story mode for the first time. So you reset your quest, you want to go back. So in order to use that reset quest button, you have to complete every single quest in the game. So now they're a different color if you haven't completed the quest. You can see it immediately that you need to go back and do that. Pools of Reflection is being reported as showing up on minimaps now. So when you see them on the minimap, like you could see them before, but what happens now is that when the Pool of Reflection is used on the map, instead of looking like it's full, it will actually go empty. So that minor quality of life improvement there, but it'll keep you from running after what looks like one of those experience pools only to realize, oh, my allies already picked it up. Another minor change is that chandeliers and possibly other traps, this really hasn't been tested yet, are doing much more damage in higher difficulties, or so it's being reported on Diablo fans thread that's been tracking this. So that's kind of good to see, because the traps were pretty much pointless when you got up past a certain point, especially if you were leveling on higher difficulties, and it would make it very difficult to get the achievements related to them as you're leveling up. And it's just nice to know that the traps actually might mean something when you come back on 60 and 70. So I like to hear that that's been improved, because that was kind of something of a source of frustration for me, even back in the vanilla game, because you would go from normal Nightmare Hell, and all these traps would pretty much just be kind of a pretty effect, you know, something going off, going boom, but not really helping you too much.
Now, in the undocumented changes thread, it is being reported that pets may be getting 100% of your character sheet critical hit damage stat now. It has been said that they used to get 50%. So you're looking at double the critical hit damage that your pets can do now. And pets included in this are pretty much anything you can summon. So demon hunter pets like the spider or wolf, even the sentry seems to be included in that. And of course things like the mystic ally for monks. So if this holds true, pet builds certainly have a lot more damage that they can put out now.
Alright, so beyond that, there's one more thing that was added that wasn't, or actually this one is documented, but I want to kind of save this for last. This is that there were legendary items that were not added into the game that I believe were on the website, the Blizzard's official website, but just actually weren't activated until now. I say now, I mean like 3 days ago apparently when the patch came up. But there's several unique items, specifically two uniques and two set pieces consisting of 2 items. So we've got the Moonlight Ward legendary amulet, the Hexing Pants of Mr. Yan, which is quite an interesting item, actually. I want to point that one out, because its resource generation increased while you're moving by 25% and decreased by 20 to 25% while standing still, which is great for characters that have a lot of kiting builds, but terrible for those of you that might have a sustained build where you're standing still and spamming maybe a channeling attack or something like that. So it's kind of interesting. A 2-piece sword set. It consists of 2 one-handed swords called Istvan's Paired Blades. They are the Slanderer and Little Rogue. When you complete the 2-piece set, every time you spend a primary resource, you can gain 6% increased attack speed for 5 seconds, and this does stack up to 5 times. So those of you who like dual-wielding swords and like to spend a lot of abilities, there you go. It can be quite nice for you. And then the second set is a 2-piece ring set called the Bastions of Will, a ring called Focus, and a ring called Restraint. By themselves, these rings actually have some pretty nice stats. One will provide vitality and life on hit. The other will provide attack speed and reduce cooldown. Together, they will give you a set bonus where your primary resource spenders that spend resource will deal 50% more damage when you're at full resource. So some pretty nice items going through. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for the latest updates to Diablo 3. This is patch 2.0.4 with undocumented changes and, of course, all the hotfixes that are up to date. This video being recorded on April 11th, 2014. So I'm sorry for it being a bit late, but there you go. Hopefully it has still been enlightening for those of you who may not have been following all the updates going through in Diablo. Thank you for watching. Until next time.